Myself, I have a bit of experience in cybersecurity consultancy and advising for private parts and also public bodies in Italy. No, stop there. Stop there. Okay. You put me in a slideshow timed. Okay. No. Okay, sorry, but I find quite hard to work on a timetable like that. All right, on the clock. I'm sorry, but I have to ask a bit of help again to turn down the clock here because the time slideshow. Okay, let's hope it doesn't get forward. Right, bit of experience in cybersecurity consultancy and advising for public bodies and private parties. Okay, sorry for that, but I need to stop this in some way because I don't need the time guillotine because the slideshow is going forward without ticking. So if you please can turn off the clock to manual. Okay, is there somewhere?
Where is it?
Animation, there are no animation.
No.
I'm sorry for that, but it's hard to adapt to a ticking clock.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, change slides manually is better.
Okay.
I think that F5 should
No,
work
it should
now.
work.
Okay, thank you very much again. Dankeschön. Dankeschön for your help. Dankeschön for your help very much. Let's go. Okay. I try to moonlight as an independent researcher and author in cybersecurity, cyber police, and cyber conflict matters. I had the opportunity to speak at CyCon, that's the NATO CCD Center of Excellence in Tallinn, and other bits and pieces of conference over Europe and outside of Europe. I do work in the standardization bodies, the European standardization bodies like ETSI and CENELEC. So we have a cybersecurity group focused on the standardization work on that. And let's come to what we are doing here today. Cyber, let me get started with the cliche and the oldest cliche of all. Internet changes the face of society. It's a cliche, but it is true. And from the last decades, of course, the internet has moved from something of only interest to hackers and people like most of us, I guess, to statecraft. So cyberspace is not only a cool word anymore, and it has gone from neuromancer to the NATO words of doctrine. So cyberspace is now interest of states, of nation states. They woke up a little bit late on that, but they woke up and they are on it. So cyber whatever is now part of statecraft, of security, of the strategy conversation of single nation states and multinational organizations like NATO, EU, and so on and so forth. Some things that nation states are not relevant anymore in the governance of cyberspace, but they are very relevant. Still very relevant, especially in this current climate, and we'll see that later on. And we will explore the dilemma of governance and of cyber governance and cyber policy in the key of sovereignty. That's one basic principle of the nation state, of the modern nation state, and is not being outmoded yet. So cyber, what's cyber? My title mentioned borders, and why borders? Because borders are the extrinsication of sovereignty. Basically, a state exists because it has borders. And It's a symbol and a fundamental attribute of a sovereign Westphalian state, and Westphalian states are here to stay. That's one of my basic tenets, whether we like it or not. It's no need to stress again how borders are very much part and parcel of the current political climate, Europe, the US, and so on and so forth. But how does it translate to cyberspace? How does sovereignty and the other attributes of state work when dealing with cyberspace? And sovereignty govern everything: peace, war, security, international norms, and all that. A bit of history, which is always boring, but we need to know how did we come here. Internet, which is the main part of cyberspace and probably a synonym. We'll have to discuss that, but Internet came to a sudden and widespread diffusion back in the last turn of the last century, and was this widespread diffusion and openness to everybody was the result of a series of converging political and technical factors. And it's likely, from my point of view, that none of the actors involved predicted or were able to predict exactly what would happen and how disruptive this innovation was going to be. This is also true for conflicts and warfare in cyberspace. It's not new. There is history there, and we have decades of history now to look back at and hopefully learn from. And this is something that many people forget sometimes. It's not new, it's not speed of light, it's not anything that has never happened before. But we have precedent, so we must learn from that. Bit of history back, so what happened? What are the policy factors that brought to the widespread diffusion of the internet? It was in the 70s and 80s, breaking up of monopolies in telecommunication market in the United States of America. There was a key decision from the FCC, which is kind of an obscure decision, but it was very important because they reclassified at one point data processing M2M digital communication as a value-added enhanced service. So, to all intent and purposes, liberalizing the market. Telecommunication companies mainly were concerned with voice services at the time, and they didn't foresee what was going to bring. They were only preoccupied to protect their market in voice services, and saw this as a small price to pay. But this paved the way from a freer and open market for digital services, first in the US, in North America, but later also in Europe as well. Also, another policy, I would say, a non-technical factor was the free software movement, of course, because free licenses were an enabling factor also from a commercial internet as well. Free, maybe in the most restrictive sense of free as a beer, but beer, not beer, free as a beer. The availability of a lot of infrastructure software that was economically convenient allowed a lot of small companies to go into the market for internet service, ISPs, hosting providers, application providers, and so on and so forth. Think also, just for one, at the availability of Linux versus the commercial Unix system for servers. Technological factor, the packet switching architecture of internet, it wasn't designed for that, but what the net effect was to allow internet to grow organically in an easy way, just interconnecting networks. That's what internet means in the first place. How the TCP/IP protocol suite is still working. It is a standard, it is open. The local routing also of TCP/IP. I'm simplifying it, of course, but just to give an overview of what are the technical factors that brought to us the cyberspace. Local routing also enabled to add networks easily to cyberspace as a whole. You already see that robust and free in the worst sense, easy to use stacks for commercial use of the internet, and also not to forget the XDSL technologies, because crossing the last mile was always the problem in bringing the internet to millions of users. And XDSL technology allowed to use existing networks already in place, the copper networks, to access the internet. So, with cyberspace in place, basically what developed, and after the fact, I must say, was a debate on how to govern, on the governance of this new opportunity. Historically, the internet governance debate polarized around 2 points of view. One point of view is the cyberspace as an immaterial realm, completely disconnecting from the other part of the world, and that is embodied in the famous Declaration of Independence that we all know. This is a small quote from the Declaration of Independence of cyberspace back in the 90s. We come from cyberspace, the new home of mind, you have no sovereignty of where we gather. And the keyword sovereignty was there since the beginning. The Declaration of Independence was saying that this is a totally new space where existing governance structures have no bear. On the other hand, the sovereignty argument considers cyberspace only as a new telecommunication network, just a new telegraph. So a matter if it has to be governed for intergovernmental for nation states to govern and legislate on it. And there is some merit on this, as we'll see, because one of the oldest international organizations in the world, the ITU, was exactly funded for that purpose. It was called the Telegraphic Union at the time, but the states, the governments, came later to the governance game, but more and more, since the turn of the century, they see these kind of unregulated things. I don't know if it is unregulated, but we'll see better later, as a threat. Because maintaining the possibility, the chance to maintain transactional social network with ease, for instance, flexibility, relative anonymity to transfer data across borders, across physical borders, has been seen as a threat not only to state sovereignty, but also to national security itself. Especially, of course, and I have another cliche here, since the beginning of this century. It is another old cliche that since 9/11 everything changed, but everything changed. Security more and more informed nation-state policy, and the quest to regain control with any means of cyberspace began in earnest after 9/11. The sovereignty argument does have some merit, and it's not to be taken lightly, because cyber, the cloud, whatever, it doesn't exist actually, in the sense of the Declaration of Independence. Everything on cyber is physical. It's located somewhere. It's located in someone's territory. This is one of the examples is a Google data center. So they are big things that use a lot of energy. There is a lot of metal. There is a lot of stuff in there. I want to borrow here the words of Professor Michael Schmidt, who is the curator of the Tallinn Manual 1 and 2 on the laws of cyber conflict, edited by the NATO's Cooperative Self-Defense Center of Excellence, and he said, you realize it's about stuff. Cyberspace is made of stuff. It's nothing immaterial. And the stuff is somewhere. It is located somewhere in the physical space. When it's not, and submarine cables are the main example for that, it is, in any case, heavily regulated, but international law, treaties, contracts, and so on and so forth. So you cannot do without states when you govern cyberspace. So governance and national cybersecurity. We have also a problem with the definition of cybersecurity, because a lot of people mean different things when thinking about cybersecurity. When talking with people in governments, or in governmental agencies, basically when they think about cybersecurity, they think only about national cybersecurity, protecting their own networks, their own stuff, just to use the word again. Cybersecurity is a bit more of that, but that's how the word is used now more and more by governmental officers all over the world. So we have a tension between these two models of governance, and in practice, the two poles resulted in different governance models. One, on the other hand, the classic intergovernmental organization like the ITU, and the other, the network governance models. That's a new concept that in Europe sometimes they call it multi-stakeholder model, where the model of governance includes not only governments, but also all actors involved, or they have a stake in it. The problem we have, or historically, not a problem, but if you look at history, is that some sort of network governance models was already in place by the time states began to realize the potential of cyberspace and began trying to reestablish traditional sovereignty. Two examples that are the ICANN Corporation and how the DNS is managed overall. ICANN of the two is the most interesting example of this new model of governance, and it has been studied, even if it is only quote unquote only a technical body, theoretically, but it represents one example of these new decentralized networked governance models. So there was already some sort of decentralized governance models, and we have governments struggling to regain control. So where we are now, we are witnessing a resurgence of the nation state, in the classical sense, the 17th century sense, at all levels, all over the world. We have the European Union as the most complex supranational organization in deep crisis. We have the UK leaving the Union and trying to reestablish the control of their borders. That's the conversation in the UK in the physical sense, but I guess in every sense. We have the US new isolationism and protectionism. So they are trying again to protect their borders from people, from goods, but it also reflects in the cyber realm. We have China, and we will look at China in a bit more detail later on. China is the champion of the sovereignty point of view. And we have Russia, of course. So when all states, including so-called liberal democracy, want to reaffirm their sovereignty, want to defend their borders, want to control their people, most importantly. And this is not only China and Russia that want to control their people. But at the same time, they want to operate covertly outside their borders and try to deter adversaries. And we will have a look, but it doesn't work well in cyberspace. Deterrence doesn't translate well to cyberspace. So we have this dichotomy right now. We have liberal democracy behaving like autocratic states, so that's a problem. We have states that want to, on one hand, control their borders, reaffirm their sovereignty, and on the other hand, try to deter and operate in cyberspace outside their borders. Covertly or overtly, that is not, also overtly. What is cyberspace? That's the problem. I put there three definitions of cyberspace from the three arguably the strongest operator and strongest actors, national actors in cyberspace. I don't want to read all of them, of course, but some things must be stressed because they are important. All three of them talk about networks, or the networked architecture of cyberspace. I think all three have in common. And also, it's important that for Russia, it's not cyberspace, it's information space. And I think Russia is getting it better than basically the West, because it's not about cyber itself, but it's about the information residing on cyberspace. So for them, it's the information sphere that must be protected, as it's on the information battlefield that they are trying to wage their warfare outside of Russia, if needed. I see. In practice, and this is a good drawing, not an artist, but how do nation states try to impose borders? I try to classify measures that nation states, what they actually do along two variables. One variable is the policy level versus the technical level. So you have policy decisions and political decisions versus technical measures. That's one of the two variables. The other two is overt versus covert. I don't use covert in the technical intelligence means here. I use it in a somewhat looser mean, but basically the overt measures is what states have no fear of letting other people know, and covert is what they do secretly. Okay, it's a looser mean. It's not the technical mean, because covert is different than clandestine and so on and so forth. So bear with me on that. And I'm using these metrics to try to classify state practices in trying to impose borders. So in the overt part of the metrics, we have basically in the policy, in the first corner, we have all the policy attempts to bring back cyber governance under state control, operating overtly in all the intergovernmental organizations like the ITU, like the UN, where they have an intergovernmental group of experts that's working on these, and so on and so forth. Of course, in the overt arsenals, especially for more autocratic states, we have also control of the physical side of the internet. In 2011, the Egyptian government, the old Egyptian government, was able to basically bring down the internet traffic from Egypt outside to zero in a few hours or in a few tens of minutes. Why? Because cyberspace is physical. There are only so many nodes where traffic flows inside and outside of a nation, controlled by ISPs. So, if the government is able to impose to these few nodes a behavior, in that case blocking down traffic, it can shut down the internet in a whole nation. There is nothing you can do about that. Traffic went to zero in 2011 in a matter of basically instantly. Also, all these policy measures inform technical means, of course. The Great Firewall in China is one of the examples. One, they have the policy decision to try to protect their perimeter, even if, be it works or it doesn't work so well. A whole host of technical means were employed, from deep packet inspections to DNS hijacking to URLs blacklisting and so on and so forth. So what the Red Arrow means is that basically technical measures are driven by policy decisions in both of the levels, covert and overt. In the covert arsenal, we have a whole slew of other things. Content monitoring by intelligence agency, even where it is illegal. The moral suasion on ISPs, for instance, to install theoretically lawful interceptions apparatus like we've seen in the United States of America. We have the whole part of mass surveillance and bulk collecting, and we have cyber defense of the public and private networks. So the whole part of cyber conflict and cyber warfare. On the other hand, and I want to skip a slide here because it doesn't, just to be at more speed, we have the actors trying to evade the borders. And the actors are mainly non-state actors, but states as well. So what are the arsenal actors have at their disposal to try to evade and cross borders? We have encryption, we have the onion router plus the pluggable transport modules, for instance. We have VPNs, proxies, and also cryptocurrencies. Because another attribute of sovereignty is the ability to control a nation's currency and financial fluxes. So cryptocurrencies are another tool in terms of sovereignty where individuals, organizations, non-state actors in general are able to evade borders and erode nation-state sovereignty. Sovereignty is kind of the key I'm using here to try to understand the whole concept of governance and policy. Problem with those technologies is that it's dual use at best. So they can be used for individual privacy protection, they can be used by investigative journalists, but they can be used also by cyber criminals, and also by national cybersecurity operators and governments, and also by nation-state proxy or groups that works on behalf of the government. The problem is that the technology itself is neutral, is that we have some riddles to solve, some dilemmas to solve. One is deterrence in cyberspace, and the other is how to solve the security dilemma in cyber. The security dilemma is that concept in international relations, of course, that when a state employs defensive military measures, that can be interpreted by another state as an offensive measures. So basically, a weapon race is born, and possibly leading to conflict or a war. So the security dilemma in cyber is even more difficult to resolve because cyber defense, cyber conflict is offense dominated. So it is much easier to do offense than defense. And as we saw before, no clear distinction between offense and defense. As far as you can see what some other states is doing in cyber, which is difficult by itself, it's very hard to say where the defensive measures ends and where the offensive measures starts. So it's even more explosive, the situation in cyberspace, than it is in the physical space. The other problem is the struggle to reach consensus. In international law or international relations, basically state practice makes the law. But we still have a tension even in states between trying to preserve sovereignty and try to cooperate. We have problems in sharing basic definitions of cybersecurity itself, of cyberspace itself, as we've seen. We have continuously cyber operations and cyber conflict, even in peacetime. We have the problems of internet governance, and also the definition of what is a weapon, a cyber weapon. What is true is that sovereignty is the key to the future evolution of cyber norms. In my opinion, it will be the principle that will inform cyber cooperation or cyber conflict, whatever it's going to be, and the international norms that will regulate them. Also, of course, states are different. So the political climate and the overall strategy and goals of a single state will contribute to nation states themselves not cooperating and trying to evade borders. Russia is a prime example of that. Of course, there is a permissive environment for cyber criminals as long as they comply with the government and occasionally help the government if you need it. On the other hand, we have the US that ostensibly condemn the proxy hackers, but in actuality make use of them as well. Okay. We have difficulty in cooperation also on the criminal side in fighting cybercrime, even if there are some international conventions in place to help us in that, but they are still not widely ratified and used. And cyber international law. Cyber international law, while it is established that cyberspace is not the Wild West, international law applies in cyberspace. That was one of the main findings of the Telling Manual 1. State practices, however, are still paramount, and states are very wary of trying to get down and cooperate and sign treaties that could limit their own behavior. Because, okay, if an international treaty agrees that sovereignty in cyber is a principle and must be defended, you limit your own operations. So that could be a problem. I have a case study for China, but I will try to skip a bit of the slides here. The slides will be available, of course. And just look at the legislation that China introduced in the last couple of years. China, as I already said, is the champion of the national sovereignty in cyber. Basically, they want for other nations to recognize that Chinese has the right to defend their own slice of cyberspace in their own way. So we have in 2015 an anti-terror law that compels technology companies to help decrypt information and giving authorities access to data. Does that remind you of any other state? A national security law in the same year that mentions cyber explicitly and make it part of the national security as a whole. Oh, and by the way, they think about cyber as the fifth realm. It doesn't make much sense. NATO tried to do that and establish NATO as a sovereign domain of conflict, but from my point of view, that's only an attempt to deter Russia. Cyber is not a separate realm. It's part of all the other realms. And last year, just a year, we have the Overseas Non-Governmental Organization Management Law. This is not cyber-related per se, but as all non-NGOs are required to get approval from a supervisory unit to operate in China, it's quite possible that if you don't comply with data management, data disclosure, and so on and so forth, that the Chinese authorities will impel on you, you will not be able to operate in China anymore. And the cybersecurity law just last November that increases the government's powers to record and impede the dissemination of information deemed illegal, two key recurrent themes: ability to monitor and control information, and the compliance of foreign enterprises with the rules set forth by the authorities. So in Chinese territory, you must follow Chinese rules, even in cyberspace. And frankly, they have a point in that, because the whole structure of international law is structured around states. So it will be very hard to not involve nation states in the new cyber international order, whatever it's going to be. Nation states will be main actors. There is no avoiding that. Sovereignty is and will be a key principle, because as we have seen, it's about stuff. So hardware is under, it's in someone's territory, or it is regulated. But also data. Data, it's kind of a gray area in international law right now, but the data will be possibly, this is an opinion of course, deemed an object in terms of international law. If data is deemed as an object under international law, states will have then duties to protect civilian objects, for instance, so even civilians' data. So possibly governments will be asked to protect their civilian data in their territory, not only civilians' buildings or whatever. So if data itself is going to be defined as an object in terms of the law, there will be a lot of consequences. It's probably not going to happen because this is going to have some impact on espionage, for instance. Espionage right now is legal under international law, so I don't think that nation states will want to impede on that. I wrote data will be probably deemed, but I'm not so sure about that anymore, actually. But because if you enforce sovereignty, you could undermine your own cyber operation as well. The states, America for instance, prefer to use cyber deterrence if they can, and the nobody but us principle that no, we can only do that, so we are free to do that everywhere we want. It doesn't work so well and can backfire. Those two concepts are extremely attractive, however, especially in America and especially now. So I expect the problems, the ambiguity to continue. I expect sovereignty to be part of the conversation, and you can't have sovereignty without borders. So I think, unfortunately, that so-called Balkanization of cyberspace is a reality and is not going to go away. So no more one cyberspace in the sense we already do. The problem is how to involve non-state actors and other stakeholders to preserve freedom and the advantages of the internet. And that's it. That's an open question. How to do that? And that's it for now. Thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any questions at all, feel free to ask.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Now we will have time for questions. I have the mobile microphone with me. Just give me a little sign. And just something about a schedule, something organizational. After this discussion round, we will have a short coffee break, followed by the next panel, which will be held about the challenges to face in a digital environment. So, any questions, please raise a hand.
No.
Hi. It's basically not a question, but I think it would be more an answer to your question. In my opinion, I mean, I might be wrong, but the problem that every government is having, that it's about power. You know, we have more and more people, less resources, and now what they're doing in the internet is they try to preserve their power because they're old people or stupid people or politicians who only see their own stuff. So we need to get like guys like the pirates, like specialists into each government. Yeah. So that would be the solution.
I totally agree with that.
Please a bit.
Sorry.
Because of the screen.
Yeah, okay. I totally agree with that. Of course, power is one of the mainstays of our international relations work. So power is not everything, but most of it. Sovereignty is one of the manifestations of power, so I totally agree with you. We need to have people, knowledge people in the governments, yes. I couldn't agree more with that. We need to have people that crosses boundaries, however. We need not pure techies. We need to have people who understand the technology, but who understand the policy as well, and also the law as well. So what we need is people and also environments where people from the technical side, from the policy side, and from the law side can learn from each other. That's most importantly, because if you have boundaries between, one of the things people say is that cybersecurity is too important to be left to techies. Okay, I don't like that formulation. I don't like the formulation because I don't like to pigeonhole people in one role. I mean, you can be very knowledgeable and a hacker, and you can know about policy as well, or you can know about law, but you can understand as well technology. So we need more commingling of all the communities because this is not going to work in other ways.
Other questions, please? No one? No one. So, then I say thank you for this very interesting insights into cyberspace and so-called reality that are not as separated as many thought. So, thank you very much, and we will now be having a short coffee break, followed by the next panel by 1:30. Thank you.